video tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to draw waves, ocean waves, using chalk or soft pastels. I'm going to start by indicating my sky, and in this drawing I'm going to be working from the background to the middle ground to the foreground. And I started with just some dark blue, and then I'm enhancing that with a little bit of light blue and a little bit of white to create some atmosphere. Now I'm going to define the horizon line and where the ocean water goes back into the distance. It's also going to be a blue, and I'm going to start with a light blue and then accentuate it with a darker blue and kind of create some ripples in there to indicate waves off in the distance. Now as I come closer to the viewer, I'm going to start to get a little bit darker and start to look at my photo reference and really notice the areas that are light and dark. This is a good place to start, is just to think about the tonality in your photo reference and try to put those tones that you see on your paper. In this case, I'm working back and forth between dark values of blue and lighter values of blue. You'll also notice that the directional lines that I make for the waves are going in the same direction. This is very important. These are called cross contour lines. And when you're adding any type of color or any type of value to a drawing, you want to make sure that you add the value or color in the direction of the cross contour lines. It'll go a long way in creating the illusion of form for a three-dimensional object. Now I'm going to start to indicate the caps of my waves, and the caps are not all going to be covered with white, so I'm going to start with the darker values, and then I'm going to build up my lighter values on top of that, and maybe go back and rework some of those darker values a little bit further. You'll notice that some areas I'm deciding to smear with my fingers or blend with my fingers, and other areas I'm deciding to leave alone. This is a good idea when using chalk pastels. Have some areas that are blended in, some areas that are not. Most of the areas that you're going to decide not to blend, you're going to find are going to be on your top layers of your drawing, which is another important factor in drawing with chalk pastels. Make sure that you put a lot of layers of colors on. So I'm really building up my layers, building up the colors. Now I'm going to use a little bit of dark brown and darken up a little bit of that shadow underneath the wave. I'm going to use brown here because brown is a little bit softer than black. Black's a little heavy and it'll make my drawing look unnatural. But if I use brown, it'll make the shadows a little bit softer and make it seem a little bit more natural. Especially when brown and blue mix together, it gives you a more natural black anyway. So it's a good idea to try to stay away from the black and use the brown as much as possible, brown with blue, to make your blacks. Now I'm going to start adding the foam that happens on top of the waves, and to do this I'm going to go right on top of the wave with my white. I'm going to think about my light source, and in this case my light source is coming from the right side of the image, so the foam caps actually have a highlighted side and a shadowed side, so I'm going to make sure that I create that highlighted side by putting a heavy application of white on the right side of the caps. And it's okay if some of the caps have some of that blue in there, again, because we're going to have a highlight, we're going to need to have some shadow too. Now I'm going to highlight the waves as they go down, and the little part in between the crests. There's a little bit of highlight in between there, so I'm going to indicate that with a little bit of white. Another thing you'll want to pay attention to is usually when you're drawing waves, they're marked by strong diagonal lines right next to strong horizontal lines, and this is definitely happening in this drawing. You can see in between each crest with a wave there are horizontal linear qualities, and then on the wave itself it's definitely a diagonal line that's happening there. Alright, now I'm going to go back and just enhance those highlights just a little bit further on the crests of the wave where that foam is happening, make the light source seem a little bit more realistic. And with a dark blue I'm going to create a little bit of shadow underneath the foam on the waves, just to create again a little bit of more of a three-dimensional illusion there. Then once I've got my middle ground complete, I'm ready to move on to the foreground. In this case it's going to be another wave, and I'm going to work the wave in much of the same way that I did the previous wave, except in this wave in particular it's closer to the viewer, so logically we know there's going to be a little bit more detail there. In this case there's a little bit more color too. We're going to start adding some of this light blue-green right at the peaks of these waves. This is happening because the light source is actually shining through the wave, and when this happens it creates a little bit of a lighter value And since this is ocean water, it's got a little bit of green to it too. So I'm also going to enhance that with just a little bit of yellow green, a little bit darker yellow green as well as the blue green. Now I'm also going to want to tone that down just a little bit. That green that I put on there is a little strong, so I'm going to tone it down with a little bit of blue and make it more of an oceany looking blue-green. And now again with some of the lighter values, with the light blue on top of it, it's going to create some of the illusions of ripples in the ocean. Now this isn't going to be the little foam pieces that happen when a wave breaks. Instead, these are just highlights that are happening from the light source, kind of the ripples that happen in the waves when a wave breaks. So you'll notice the more colors that we add, the more depth that happens in our drawing, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. You can overwork things sometimes, so you have to be real smart about that, but you also need to keep in mind that the more layers of color you add, usually the more depth you have in your colors and the more realistic things look. Alright, now I'm going to start adding some of the foam that happens when the waves are breaking in this wave in the foreground. And again, I'm paying real close attention to my photo reference for this. It's really hard to make things up and make them look realistic. It's almost like thinking that you could take a picture of something, take a photograph of something without pointing the camera at it. You have to look at subject matter in order to draw it. In this case, with waves, it's a good idea to take a photograph of that or use a photograph and look at that, because waves are constantly moving. Sometimes it's hard to see the shadows and highlights that happen. And we don't need to forget, in the foreground we've got a highlighted side and a shadowed side of our waves. It's very subtle, but it's very important to add too. A little bit of shadow here on the side of the wave that is on the opposite side of the light source. Of course, our light source is on the other side of the wave, so add just a little bit of breaking waves off in the distance. Now it's time to add some of that lacing foam that happens when waves are breaking, and this should always be the last thing that you add when you're drawing waves. Just a little indication of that. You could overdo that real easily. Make sure you don't do that. And then again, working to the extreme foreground now, I'm going to put some of those horizontal lines again to indicate that the waves are breaking and there's a little bit of a calm space in between the two sets of breaking waves. And just a touch of the blue-green again right underneath the top of the crest, and that's how you draw waves using chalk pastels.